What's going on, everybody? We're finally reading it. It. I'm just gonna dive right into the first chapter because I got work in the morning, which really sucks. So, yeah, I'm gonna try to read through this chapter without stuttering too badly, falling over my own words. Wouldn't be the first time, but yeah, get prepared to be terrified. Maybe I don't know. You tell me in the comment section below. Chapter 1, After the Flood, 1957. Now, in this book, he has like little mini chapters within chapters. So when you hear me say like 1, 2, 3, and so on, that's like the mini chapter inside the chapter 1 I'm reading. So, yeah. Chapter 1, I'm wondering if I should censor some stuff, but we'll see if I do or not. The terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did end, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter swollen with rain. The boat bobbed, listed, right itself again, dived bravely through treacherous whirlpools, and continued on its way down Witcham Street toward the traffic light which marked the intersection of Witcham and Jackson. The three vertical lenses on all sides of the traffic light were dark this afternoon in the fall of 1957. And the houses were all dark too. There had been steady rain for a week now, and 2 days ago the winds had come as well. Most sections of the area had lost their power then, and it was not back on yet. A small boy in a yellow slicker and red galoshes ran cheerfully along beside the newspaper boat. The rain had not stopped, but it was finally slackening. It tapped on the yellow hood of the boy's slicker, sounding to his ears like rain on a shed roof. A comfortable, almost cozy sound. The boy in the yellow slicker was George Demgrove. He was 6. His brother, William, known to most of the kids at Derry Elementary School, and even to the teachers who would never have used the nickname to his face, as Stuttering Bill, was at home, hacking out the last of a nasty case of influenza. In that autumn of 1957, 8 months before the real horrors began, and 28 years before the final showdown, Stuttering Bill was 10 years old. What's up, King Glenn? Yes, sir. Bedtime story time. Bill had made the boat beside which George now ran. He had made it sitting up in bed, his back propped up against the pile of pillows, while their mother played Frere Iris on the piano in the parlor, and rain swept restlessly against his bedroom window. About 3/4 of the way down the block, as one headed toward the intersection of the dead traffic light, Witcham Street was blocked to motor traffic by smudge pots and 4 orange sawhorses. Stenciled across each of the horses was Derry Department of Public Works. Beyond them, the rain had spilled out of gutters clogged with branches and rocks, and big sticky piles of autumn leaves. The water had first pried fingerholds in the paving, and then snatched whole, greedy handfuls. All this by the time the 3rd day of the rains. By noon of the 4th day, big chunks of this resurface were boating through the intersection at the same time. The intersection of Jackson and Witcham, like miniature whitewater rafts. By that time, many people in Derry had begun to make nervous jokes about arcs. The Public Works Department had managed to keep Jackson Street open, but Witcham was impassable from the sawhorses all the way down to the center of town. But everyone agreed The worst was over. The stream, the Kanduskiag stream, and crested just below its banks in the barrens and bare inches below the concrete sides of the canal, which channeled it tightly as it passed through downtown. Right now, a gang of men, Zach Denbrough, George and Bill's father, among them, were removing the sandbags they had thrown up in haste with such panicky haste the day before. Yesterday overflow and expensive flood damage had seemed almost inevitable. God knew it had happened before. The flooding in 1931 had been a disaster which had cost millions of dollars and almost 2 dozen lives. That was a long time ago, but there were still enough people around who remembered to scare the rest. One of the flood victims had been found 25 miles east in Bucksport. The fish had eaten this unfortunate gentleman's eyes, 3 of his fingers, his penis, and most of his left foot. Clutched in what remained of his hands had been a Ford steering wheel. Shout out to the one. Now, though, the river was receding, and when the new Banger Hydro Dam went upstream, the river would cease to be a threat. Or so said Zach Denbrough. He worked for Bangor Hydroelectric. As for the rest, well, future floods could take care of themselves. The thing was to get through this one, to get the power back on, and then to forget it. And dare such forgetting of tragedy and disaster was almost an art, as Bill Denbrough would come to discover in the course of time. George paused just beyond the sod horses at the edge of a deep ravine that had been cut through the tar surface of Witcham Street. This ravine ran on an almost exact diagonal. It ended on the far side of the street, roughly 40 feet farther down the hill from where he now stood on the right. He laughed aloud. The sound of solitary glee, a bright run on that gray afternoon, as a vagary of the flowing water took his paper boat into a scale mile rapids, which had been formed by the break in the tar. The urgent water had cut a channel which ran along the diagonal, and so this boat traveled from one side of Witcham Street to the other, the current carrying it so fast that George had to sprint to keep up with it. Water sprayed out from beneath his galoshes in muddy sheets. Their buckles made a jolly jingling as George Denbrough ran towards his strange death. And a feeling which filled him at that moment, was clear and simple love for his brother Bill. Love and a touch of regret that Bill couldn't be here to see this and be a part of it. Of course, he would try to describe it to Bill when he got home, but he knew he wouldn't be able to make Bill see it the way Bill would have been able to make him see it if the positions had been reversed. Bill was good at reading and writing, but even at his age, George was wise enough to know that wasn't the only reason why Bill got all A's on his report cards, or why his teachers liked his composition so well. Telling was only part of it. Bill was good at seeing. The boat nearly whistled along the diagonal channel, just a page torn from the classified section of the Daily News. But now, George imagined it as a PT boat in a war movie, like the ones at the matinees. Like the ones he sometimes saw down to Dairy Theater with Bill at Saturday matinees. A war picture with John Wayne fighting the Japs. The prow of the newspaper boat threw sprays of water to either side of Witcham Street. A fresh streamlet rushed over the break in the tar at this point, creating a fairly large whirlpool, and it seemed to him that the boat must be swamped or capsized. It leaned alarmingly on down toward the intersection. Leaned alarmingly, and then George cheered as it righted itself. Yay! Turned and went racing on down toward the intersection. George sprinted to catch up. Over his head, a grim gust of October wind rattled the trees, now almost completely unburdened of their freight of colored leaves by the storm, which had been this year a reaper of the most ruthless sort. 2. Sitting up in his bed, his cheeks still flushed with teeth, but his fever, like the Kandusky egg, finally receding. Bill had finished the boat, but when George reached for it, Bill held it out of reach. Now, get me the paraffin. What's that? Where is it? It's on the cellar shelf as you go downstairs, Bill said. In a box that says golf. Bring that to me, and a knife, and a bowl, and a pack of matches. George had gone obediently to get these things. You could hear his mother playing the piano. Not Fröhlich now, but something else he didn't like so well. Something that sounded dry and fussy. He could hear rain flicking steadily against the kitchen windows. These were comfortable sounds, but the thought of the cellar was not a bit comfortable. He did not like the cellar, and he did not like going down the cellar stairs, because he always imagined there was something down there in the dark. Well, silly, of course. His father said so. His mother said so. And even more important, Bill said so. But still, he did not even like opening the door to flick on the light, because he always had the idea this was so exquisitely stupid. I had to figure out that word, Chet. Stephen, he didn't dare tell anyone that while he was feeling for the light switch, some horrible clawed paw would settle lightly over his wrist and jerk him down into the darkness that smelled of dirt and wet and dim rotted vegetables. Stupid. There was no thing with claws, all hairy and full of killing spite. Every now and then, someone went crazy and killed a lot of people. Sometimes Chet Huntley told about such things on the evening news. And of course, there were commies. But there was a weirdo monster living down in their cellar. Still, this idea lingered. And those interminable moments while he was groping for the light switch, the cellar seemed to intensify until it filled the world. Smells of dirt and wet, long-gone vegetables would merge into one unmistakable, ineluctable smell. The smell of the monster, the apotheosis of all monsters. It was the smell of something for which he had no name. The smell of it. The name of the book, It. Roll of credits. Crouch and lurking and ready to spring. A creature which would eat anything, but which was especially hungry for bug meat. He had opened the door that morning and had groped interminably for the switch, holding the jam in his usual death grip. His eyes squinched shut, the tips of his tongue poked from the corner of his mouth like an agonizing rootlet, searching for water in place of the drought. Funny, sure, you betcha. But look at you, Georgie. Georgie's scared of the dark. What a baby. The sound of the piano came from what his father called the living room, and what his mother called the parlor. I've always wondered when I've read older books what a parlor was. That answers my question. It's a living room. Thank you, Stephen King. His fingers. It sounded like music from another world, far away. That way, talk and laughter on a summer, crowded beach must sound to an exhausted swimmer who struggles with the undertow. His fingers found the switch. Ah! He snapped it, and nothing. No light. Oh, cripes! The power! George snatched his arm back as if from a basket full of snakes. He stepped back from the open cellar door, his heart hurrying in his chest. The power was out, of course. He had forgotten the power was out. Jeezly crow. What now? Go back and tell Billy he couldn't get the box of paraffin because the power was out? And he was afraid that something might get him as he stood on the cellar stairs? Something that wasn't a commie or mass murder, but a creature much worse than either? That it would be simply slither part of its rotted. That it would simply slither part of its rotted self up between the stair risers and grab his ankle? That would go over big, wouldn't it? Others might laugh at such a fancy, but Bill wouldn't laugh. Bill would get mad. Bill would say, Girl rubs, Georgie. You want this boat or not? As if this thought were his cue, Bill called from his bedroom. Did you die out there, Georgie? No, I'm getting it, Bill. George called back at once. He rubbed his arms, trying to make the guilty gooseflesh disappear, and be smooth skin again. I just stopped to get a drink of water. Well, hurry up. So he walked down the 4 steps to the cellar shelf, his heart a warm, beating hammer in his throat. The hair on the nape of his neck standing at attention, his eyes hot, his hands cold. Sure, at any moment that cellar door would swing shut on its own, choking off the white light falling through the kitchen windows. And then he would hear it, something worse than all the commies and murderers in the world, worse than the Japs, worse than Tilda the Hun, worse than some things in 100 horror movies. It ground deeply. He would hear the growl in those lunatic seconds before it pounced on him and unzipped his guts. The cellar smell was worse than ever today because of the flood. Their house was high on Witcham Street, near the crest of the hill, and they had escaped the worst of it. But there was still standing water down there that had seeped in through the old rock foundation. The smell was low and unpleasant, making you want to take only the shallowest of breaths. George sifted through the junk on the shelf as fast as he could. Old cans of kiwi shoe polish and shoe polish rags, a broken kerosene lamp, 2 mostly empty bottles of Windex, an old flat can of turtle wax. For some reason, this can struck him, and he spent nearly 30 seconds looking at the turtle on the lid with a kind of hypnotic wonder. Then he tossed it back. And here it was at last. A square box with the word Gulf on it. George snatched it and ran up the stairs as fast as he could, suddenly aware that his short tail was out, and suddenly sure that his short tail would be his undoing. The thing in the cellar would allow him to get to almost all the way out, and then he would grab the tail of his shirt and snatch him back, and he reached the kitchen and swept the door shut behind him. It banged gustily. He leaned back against it with his eyes closed, sweat popping out from his arms and forehead. A box of paraffin gripped tightly on one hand. The piano had come to a stop as a mama's voice floated to him. Georgie, can't you slam that door a little harder next time? Maybe you could break some of the plates in the Welsh dresser if you really tried. Sorry, Mom, he called back. Georgie, you waste, Bill said from his bedroom. He pitched his voice slow so his mother would not hear. George snickered a little. His fear was already gone. It slipped away from him as easily as a nightmare. Slips away from a man who awakes. Pulls getting gasping from his grip. Who feels his body and stares at his surroundings to make sure that none of it ever happened, and who then begins at once to forget it. Half is gone by the time his feet hit the floor. 3/4 of it by the time he finishes his breakfast. All gone. Until the next time when, in the grip of the nightmare, all fears will be remembered. That turtle, George, he thought. Going to the counter drawer where the matches were kept. Where did I see a turtle like that before? But no answer came, and he dismissed the question. He got a pack of matches from the drawer, a knife from the rack, holding a sharp edge studiously away from his body, as his dad had taught him, and a small bowl from the Welsh dresser in the dining room. Then he went back into Bill's room. What an a-hole you are, Georgie, Bill said, amiably enough. Pushed back some of this sick stuff off his night table. An empty glass, a pitcher of water, Kleenex books, a bottle of Vicks Vapor Rub, the smell of which Bill would always associate all of his life with thick, phlegmy chests and snotty noses. The old Philco radio was there too, playing not Chopin or Bach, but a Little Richard tune there too. Playing a Little Richard tune. Very softly, however, so softly that Little Richard was robbed of all of his raw and elemental power. Their mother, who had studied classical piano at Juilliard, hated rock and roll. She did not merely dislike it, she abominated it. I'm no a-hole, George said, sitting on the edge of Bill's bed and putting the things he had gathered on the night table. Yes, you are, Bill said. Nothing but a great big brown a-hole, that's you. George tried to imagine a kid who was nothing but a great big a-hole on legs and began to giggle. Your a-hole is bigger than Augusta, Bill said, beginning to giggle too. Your a-hole is bigger than the whole state, George replied. This broke both boys up for nearly 2 minutes. There followed a whispered conversation of a sort, which means very little to anyone save small boys. Accusations of who was the biggest a-hole, who had the biggest a-hole, which a-hole was the brownest, and so on. Finally, Bill said one of the forbidden words. He accused George of being a brown, shitty a-hole. And they both got laughing hard. Bill's laughter turned into a coughing fit as it finally began to taper off. By then, Bill's face had gotten a flaming shade of which George regarded with some alarm. The piano stopped again. They both looked in the direction of the parlor, living room, listening for the piano bench to scrape back, listening for their mother's impatient footsteps. Bill buried his mouth in the crook of his elbow, stifling the rest of the coughs, pointing at the pitcher at the same time. George poured him a glass of water, which he drank off. The piano began once more, or at least again. Stuttering, Bill never forgot that piece. Stuttering Bill never forgot that piece, and even many years later, never failed to bring gooseflesh to his arms and back. His heart would drop, and he would remember, my mother was playing that the day George died. You gonna cough anymore, Bill? No. Bill pulled a Kleenex from the box, made a rumbling sound in his chest, spat phlegm into the tissue, screwed it up, and tossed it into the wastebasket by his bed, which was filled with similar twists of tissue. Then he opened the box of paraffin and dropped a waxy cube of the stuff into his palm. George watched him closely, but without speaking or questioning. Bill didn't like George talking to him while he did stuff, but George had learned that if he just kept his mouth shut, Bill would usually explain what he was doing. Bill used a knife to cut off a small piece of the paraffin cube. He put the piece in a bowl, then struck a match and put it on top of the paraffin. The two boys watched a small yellow flame as the dying wind drove rain against the window and occasional spatters. Got to waterproof the boat, or it'll just get wet and sink, Bill said. When he was with George, his stutter was light. Sometimes he didn't stutter at all. At school, however, it could become so bad that talking became impossible for him. Communication would cease, and Bill's schoolmates would look somewhere else while Bill clutched the sides of his desk, his face growing almost as red as his hair, his eyes squeezed into slits as he tried to winch out some word of his stubborn throat. Sometimes, most times, the word would come. Other times it simply refused. He had been hit by a car when he was 3 and knocked into the side of a building. He had remained unconscious for 7 hours. Damn. I was going to stream. Have we just joined? Here we go. Unconscious for 7 hours. Mom said it was an accident which had caused the stutter. George sometimes got to feeling that his dad, Bill himself, was not so sure. The piece of paraffin in the bowl was almost entirely melted. The match flame guttered lower, growing blue as it hugged a cardboard stick. And then it went out. Bill dipped his finger into the liquid, jerked it out with a faint hiss. Bill dipped his finger into the liquid, jerked it out with a faint hiss. He smiled apologetically at George. Hot, he said. After a few seconds, he dipped his finger in again, began to smear the wax along the side of the boat, where it quickly dried into a milky haze. Can I do some? Okay, George asked. Okay, just don't get any on the blankets or Mom will kill you. George dripped his finger into the paraffin, which was now very warm but no longer hot, and began to spread it along the other side of the boat. Don't put on so much, you a-hole. You want to sink it on its maiden cruise? I'm sorry. That's all right. Just go easy. George finished the other side, then held the boat in his hands. Felt a little heavier, but not much. Too cool, he said. I'm gonna go out and sail it. Yeah, you do that, Bill said. He suddenly looked tired. Tired, and still not very well. I wish you could come, George said. He really did. Bill sometimes got bossy after a while, but he always had the coolest ideas, and he hardly ever hit. It's your boat, really. She, Bill said. You call boats she. She, then. I wish I could come, too, Bill said gloomily. Well, George shifted from one foot to the other, the boat in his hands. You put on your rain stuff, Bill said, or you'll wind up with the hoot like me. Probably catch it anyway, from my germs. Thanks, Bill. It's a neat boat. And he did something he didn't do for a long time, something Bill never forgot. He leaned over and kissed his brother's cheek. You'll catch it now for sure, you a-hole, Bill said. But he seemed cheered up all the time. He smiled at George. Put all the stuff back too, or Mom will have a bird. Sure. He gathered the waterproofing equipment across the room. The boat perched precariously on the top of the paraffin box, which was sitting askew in the little bowl. Georgie. George turned back to look at his brother. Be careful. Sure. His brow creased a little. That was something your mom said, not your big brother. It was as strange as him giving Bill a kiss. Sure, I will. He went out. Bill never saw him again. 3. Now, here he was, chasing his boat down the left side of Witcham Street. He was running fast, but the water was running faster, and his boat was pulling ahead. He heard a deepening roar and saw that 50 yards further down the hill, the water in the gutter was cascading into a storm drain that's still open. It was a long, dark semicircle cut into the curb bank, and as George watched, a stripped branch, its bark, as dark and glistening as sealskin, shut into the storm drain's maw. It hung up there for a moment and then slipped down inside. That was where the boat was headed. Oh shit, Shinola, he yelled, dismayed. He put on speed, and for a moment he thought he would catch the boat. Then one of his feet slipped and he went sprawling, skidding one knee and crying out in pain. From his new pavement level perspective, he watched his boat swing around twice, momentarily caught in another whirlpool, and then disappear. Shit, Shinola, he yelled again, and slammed his fist down on the pavement. That hurt too. He began to cry a little. What a stupid way to lose a boat. He got up and walked over to the storm drain. He dropped down to his knees and peered in. The water made a dank hollow sound as it fell into the darkness. It was a spooky sound. It reminded him of, huh? The sound was jerked out of him as off on a string, and he recoiled. There were yellow eyes in there. The sort of eyes he had always imagined but had never actually seen down in the basement. It's an animal, he thought incoherently. That's all it is, some animal. Maybe a house cat that got stuck down in there. Still, he was ready to run. Would run in a second or two, when his mental switchboard had dealt with the shock that those shiny two yellow eyes had given him. He felt the rough surface of the macadam under his fingers, and the thin sheet of cold water flowing around them. He saw himself getting up and backing away, and that was when a voice, a perfectly reasonable voice, and rather pleasant voice, spoke to him inside the storm drain. Y'all ready for Pennywise, y'all? Hey, Georgie, it said. George blinked and looked again. He could barely credit what he saw. It was like something from a made-up story, or a movie where, the animals will talk and dance. If he had been 10 years older, he would not have believed what he had seen. But he was not 16. He was 6. There was a clown in the storm drain. The light in there was far from good, but it was good enough so that George Denbrough was sure of what he was seeing. It was a clown, like in the circus or on TV. In fact, he looked like a cross between Bozo and Clarabelle, who talked by honking. His, or was it her? George was never really sure of the gender. On Howdy Doody Saturday mornings. Buffalo Bob was just about the only one who could understand Clarabelle, and that always cracked George up. The face of the clown in the storm drain was white. There were funny tufts of red hair on either side of his bald head, and there was a big clown smile painted over his mouth. If George had been inhabiting a year later, he was sure that of Ronald McDonald before Bozo Clarabelle. I don't really understand what that means, but whatever. The clown held a bunch of balloons, all colors, like gorgeous ripe fruit in one hand. In the other hand, he held George's newspaper boat. Want your boat, Georgie? The clown smiled. George smiled back. He couldn't help it. It was the kind of smile you just had to answer. I sure do, he said. The clown laughed. I sure do. That's good. That's very good. And how about the balloon? Well, sure. He reached forward and then drew his hand reluctantly back. I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers. My dad said so. Very wise of your dad, the clown in the storm drain said, smiling. How? George wondered. Could I have thought his eyes were yellow? They were bright, dancing blue, and the color of his mom's eyes and Bill's. Very wise indeed. Therefore, I would introduce myself. I, Georgie, am Mr. Bob Gray, also known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Pennywise, meet George Denbrough. George, meet Pennywise. And now we know each other. I'm not a stranger to you, and you are not a stranger to me. Correct? George giggled. I guess so. He reached forward again and drew his hand back again. How did you get down there? Storm just blew me away, Pennywise the dancing clown said. It blew the whole circus away. Can you smell the circus, Georgie? George leaned forward. Suddenly he could smell peanuts, hot roasted peanuts, and vinegar, the white kind you put on your French fries. Through a hole in the cap, he could smell cotton candy and frying doughboys and the faint but thunderous odor of wild animal shit. He could smell the cheery aroma of Midway sawdust. And yet, under it all was the smell of flood and decomposing leaves and dark storm-drained shadows. That smell was wet and rotten, the cellar smell. But the other smells were stronger. You bet I can smell it. Want your boat, Georgie? Pennywise asked. I can only repeat myself because you really do not seem that eager. He held it up, smiling. He was wearing a baggy silk suit with great big orange buttons. A bright tie, electric blue, flopped down his front, and on his hands were big white gloves, like the kind Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck always wore. Yeah, sure, George said, looking into the storm drain. And a balloon. I've got a red one, and a green, and yellow, and blue. Do they float? Float? The clown's grin widened. Oh, yes, they do indeed. They float. And there's cotton candy. George reached. The clown seized his arms, and George saw the clown's face change. What he saw then was terrible enough to make his worst imaginings of the thing in the cellar look like sweet dreams. What he saw destroyed his sanity in one clawing stroke. They float! The thing in the drain crooned in a clawed, chuckling voice. It held George's arms in a thick and warmy grip. It pulled George toward the terrible darkness where the water rushed and roared and bellowed as it bore its cargo of storm debris toward the sea. George craned his neck away from the final blackness and began to scream into the rain. To scream mindlessly into the white autumn sky which curved above Derry on that day in the fall of 1957. His screams were shrill and piercing, and all up and down Witcham Street, people came to their windows or bolted onto their porches. They float, it growled. They float, Georgie. And when you're down here with me, you'll float too. George's shoulders socked against the cement of the curb, and Dave Gardner, who had stayed home from his job at the shoe boat that day because of the flood, saw only a small boy in a yellow rain slicker. A small boy who was screaming and withering in the gutter with muddy water surfing over his face and making his scream sound bubbly. Everything down here floats, That chuckling, rotten voice whispered, and suddenly there was a ripping noise and a flaring sheet of agony, and George Denbrough knew no more. Dave Gardner was the first to get there, and although he arrived only 45 seconds after the first scream, George Denbrough was already dead. Gardner grabbed him by the back of the slicker, pulled him into the street, and began to scream himself as George's body turned over in his hands. The left side of George's slicker was now bright red. Blood flowed into a storm drain from the tattered hole where the left arm had been. A knob of bone, horribly bright, peeked through the torn cloth. The boy's eyes stared up in the white sky, and as Dave staggered away from the others, already running pell-mell down the street, they began to fill up with rain. 4. Somewhere below, in the storm drain that was already filled with nearly to capacity with runoff, there could have been no one down there, the county sheriff would later explain to a Derry news reporter with a frustrated fury so great it was almost agony. Hercules himself would have been swept away in the driving current. George's newspaper boat shot onward through the nighted chambers and long concrete hallways that roared and chimed with water. For a while, it ran neck and neck with a dead chicken that floated with its yellowy, reptilian toes pointed at the dripping ceiling. Then, at some junction east of the town, the chicken was swept off to the left, while George's boat went straight. An hour later, while George's mother was being sedated in the emergency room at Derry Home Hospital, and while stuttering Bill sat stunned and white and silent in his bed, listening to his father sob hoarsely in the parlor where his mother had been playing, for at least when George went out, the boat shot out through a concrete loophole like a bullet, exiting the muzzle of a gun and ran at the speed of a slew raceway and into an unnamed stream. When it joined the boiling, swollen Penobscot River 20 minutes later, first rifts of blue had begun to show in the sky overhead. The storm was over. The boat dipped and swayed and sometimes took on water, but it did not sink. The two brothers had waterproofed it well. I do not know where it finally fetched up, if ever it did. Perhaps it reached the sea and sails there forever, like a magic boat in a fairy tale. All I know is that it was still afloat and still running on the breast of the flood when it passed the incorporated town of limits of Derry, Maine. And there it passes out of this tale forever. And that's the end of that chat. I gotta go to sleep. I got work at 8 a.m., which is in 7 hours. So I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you guys smash that like button and share this video out. And I will see you guys in the next video. See you guys later. Peace.